She walked in, holding his phone, my brother's phone. The messages were right there, staring me in the face. My heart stopped. They'd been lying to me. The affair had gone on for months, and they thought I'd never find out. I was about to lose everything. But then came the twist. What she said next shattered me in a way I never saw coming. When I think back to how everything started, I can't pinpoint the exact moment when the spark of doubt first flickered. Maybe it was the little things, a missed call here, a message there, but I never imagined it would lead me to where I am now. My wife and I had been together for years. Our relationship was solid, or at least, I thought it was. We had our rough patches, sure. But who doesn't? No marriage is perfect, right? Yet, when I look back now, I wonder if the signs were always there and I was just too blind to see them. The first time I questioned her loyalty wasn't even something big. It was just a feeling. I chalked it up to stress. She'd been working more lately, staying out late with the girls. I never thought much of it. She was my wife, and I trusted her. But then came the nights when she came home, still in that work mode. Cold, distant, something was off, but I couldn't place it. At first, I blamed myself. Was I being too needy? Maybe I wasn't pulling my weight. I'd been working a lot, and there were times when I was too tired to even talk. But then, the questions began. She started being careful with her phone. Not in a "I'm hiding something" way, but in a "I'm trying to be respectful of your privacy" way. You know the kind. Always turning the screen away from me, making sure I didn't see notifications pop up. She even began leaving the room when she got a call, which was strange because we had never had secrets like that. I tried to ignore it. Maybe she was just stressed. Or maybe I was paranoid. But a few weeks later, I came home early from work, something I hadn't planned. And that's when I found her, sitting on the couch, phone in hand, looking at something. Or someone. When she saw me, she quickly swiped away the screen and fumbled with her phone, as if she had been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. Her face flushed. She tried to act normal, but it was too late. The doubt was planted, and I couldn't unsee it. At this point, I wasn't sure if she was cheating. I wanted to believe that I was just being paranoid, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Still, I didn't confront her, not yet. I kept my thoughts to myself, burying them deep because I didn't want to seem like that guy, the guy who accuses his wife of things without proof. But something inside me told me to pay closer attention. Maybe I needed to become the detective in my own life. And the more I looked, the more I found. Her phone habits, the long nights out, the vague answers when I asked about her day. It was all starting to add up, but I had no real evidence. Not yet. And that's when I decided, if there was something going on, I would find out. Looking back now, I know I wasn't handling things the best way. But when you're drowning in doubt, you do things you wouldn't normally consider. Trust had always been the cornerstone of our relationship. So when that uneasy feeling started to creep in, I brushed it off at first. But as days turned into weeks, the little things began to pile up. Things I couldn't ignore anymore. Her phone was always in her hand. But it wasn't the phone that bothered me. It was how she guarded it. If I so much as glanced over at her screen, she'd quickly swipe it away. Little things like that, what should have been nothing, set off alarms in my head. And when I asked about it, she would shrug it off, claiming I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but deep down, something didn't sit right. Then there were the photos. Her social media was filled with them, nothing too unusual at first. Just her hanging out with friends, a few shots of her at work. But in every photo, there was one guy. I didn't know him, but he was always there. Way too close. His arm around her, his hand on her back. It wasn't like a friendly gesture. No, it felt more like something intimate, something personal. I told myself I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. I didn't have solid proof, just suspicion. But when you're dealing with your own doubts, you start looking for answers. So I did. I started tracking her routine. The late nights, the girls' nights out. On those nights, her phone was always buzzing, nonstop. It wasn't just one message or a phone call. It was constant. And that's when I made the decision. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but my curiosity got the best of me. One night, when she fell asleep beside me, her phone in hand, I unlocked it. I found what I was looking for, her messages with him. They were sweet, flirtatious, and full of inside jokes. They weren't just casual chats. These were personal, intimate conversations. I should have confronted her right then, but I didn't. I couldn't. It wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about waiting for the right moment to make her admit it. And that's when I realized the man she was cheating with, he wasn't just some stranger. It was someone I knew, someone I should have seen all along. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought I had all the pieces of the puzzle, but when I saw his name, everything I'd known crumbled. The guy she was seeing wasn't just some stranger, it was my younger brother. The betrayal wasn't just against me. It was against everything I stood for. Someone I trusted with my life, my family, was now a part of this twisted web of lies. I sat there, frozen. It didn't make sense. How could she do this? How could he? My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but one thought kept circling in my head. How long had this been going on? How long had I been blind to the fact that the two people I loved and trusted most had been lying to my face, behind my back? The worst part? I didn't even know how to confront them. I'd found the proof, sure, but I wasn't ready to unleash the storm. The truth was, I didn't know if I was ready to lose my wife, or if I was prepared to see my brother for what he truly was. I was filled with a kind of rage I hadn't felt in years, but also a sick kind of sadness. They had both betrayed me in the worst way possible, but what would confronting them achieve? Would it make things better or just drag me further into the abyss of this nightmare? For days, I stayed silent. I watched her go about her routine, completely unaware that I knew the truth. I watched her lie, laugh, go through the motions as though nothing was wrong. And the worst part? She still seemed to love me. The warmth in her eyes when she looked at me was still there, as though she wasn't the same person who'd been texting my brother behind my back. I knew I had to make a decision, but the path forward seemed impossible. If I confronted her, what would happen to our marriage? And my brother, what could I possibly say to him? How could I look him in the eye after what he'd done? It wasn't just an affair. It was the ultimate betrayal, one that cut deeper than any lie. But I couldn't keep this secret inside. Not anymore. The time for silence was over. I spent days in a haze, replaying every moment in my head. I couldn't escape it. My thoughts were consumed by the betrayal. How long had this been happening? What did it mean for me? For us? I couldn't look at my wife the same way anymore, but I wasn't ready to face the reality of what that meant. The house felt suffocating. Every time I walked past her, I could almost feel the weight of the secret between us, like an invisible wall separating us. I tried to act normal, laughing at her jokes, making small talk about our day, but every time she touched me, I felt nothing but disgust. Not for the woman I'd married, but for the person I didn't know anymore. It was as though I was living with a stranger. One night, after dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. The tension in the air was thick. I had spent too many days pretending, and I knew I needed to face the truth. I couldn't keep living like this. My heart was heavy, but I had to know. I had to confront her. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." She looked up from her phone, confused. "What about?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "About you and my brother." Her face went pale. For a second, I thought she was going to deny it. But there was no point. I had the proof. I knew. And I could see it in her eyes. She knew I knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking. I stood up, walking over to the counter where I'd placed her phone earlier. I picked it up and showed her the messages I'd read 1,000 times in my head. My brother's name, her words, the things they'd shared, the lies they'd told me for months. She collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to happen like this." I couldn't speak. I was numb. I had expected anger, maybe even rage, but all I felt was emptiness. How could she apologize when everything had already been destroyed? "Why him?" I finally managed to ask. "Why my brother?" She shook her head, unable to look me in the eye. "I don't know. It just happened. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." But her words didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. I could barely hold it together. The hurt was too raw, too fresh. But I wasn't done. There was one more person I had to confront. After that moment with my wife, I was numb. Her tears didn't faze me. Nothing did. The only thing I could focus on was the bitter, gnawing pain in my chest. I'd confronted her, but in the back of my mind, I knew the worst part was still coming. My brother. The one person I'd trusted with everything. The one person who, in a twisted way, had always been like a mirror to me. We were family, and now, he was a stranger. I had spent the better part of the evening sitting in silence, trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened, but my mind kept circling back to him. How long had this been going on? Was he really the kind of person who could betray his own blood? I didn't know, but I needed to find out. And I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about exposing the lie, about making him face the consequences of what he had done. The next morning, I called him. The tension was unbearable as the phone rang, each beep echoing through the silence. When he finally picked up, his voice was casual, but I could hear the hesitation beneath it. "Hey man, what's up?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "I need to see you," I said, my voice flat. "Right now?" There was a brief pause before he responded. "Yeah, sure. What's going on?" "Come over," I said. "I'll explain when you get here." I didn't give him a chance to ask any more questions. I hung up, my hands shaking. The pit in my stomach was like a weight that I couldn't lift. I wanted to believe that this was some misunderstanding, that maybe there was some kind of mix-up. But deep down, I knew. I had seen the evidence. It was all real. I paced around the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. The doorbell rang, and I froze. He was here. The moment had come. I opened the door, and there he stood, looking casual, just like any other day. But I knew. He had no idea what was coming. "Hey," he said with a grin, stepping inside. "What's going on? You sounded serious." I didn't say a word. Instead, I reached for my phone, unlocking it and holding up the messages between him and my wife. His face drained of color as he saw the proof. "You," I began, my voice trembling. "You've been sleeping with my wife." His expression shifted from confusion to guilt, then to something else, something I hadn't expected. There was a flicker of shame, quickly masked by defensiveness. He didn't say a word. "Answer me," I snapped, anger starting to rise. "How long has this been going on?" He stood there, silent, unable to meet my eyes. The seconds dragged on like hours. And in that moment, I knew everything had changed. He stood there, avoiding my eyes, the silence stretching painfully between us. I could feel the heat of anger rising in me. But more than that, I felt betrayed on a level I never thought possible. It wasn't just my wife. It wasn't just the affair. It was the fact that the person who should have had my back, the one person who should have been loyal above all else, was now the one I couldn't trust. And then, finally, he spoke. "I never meant for this to happen," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no defensiveness in his tone, no attempt to justify himself. Just guilt. And something else I couldn't quite place, fear. I stared at him, trying to process the words. I had expected anger, maybe even denial. But this was different. "You never meant for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice low but sharp. "What? You just accidentally fell in love with my wife. Accidentally started sleeping with her behind my back?" He winced at the accusation, but he didn't deny it. He just stood there, hands clenched at his sides, like he couldn't even bring himself to look at me. "I don't know what happened," he said, his voice strained. It started out so innocent. We were talking. It was just fun at first. But then, he trailed off, as though the words had no meaning anymore. I was furious. Furious at his cowardice, at how easy it seemed to dismiss what he'd done. He was speaking as if this wasn't the deepest betrayal imaginable. "And what about me, huh?" I shot back, my voice growing louder. "What about everything I've done for you? For this family? How could you do this to me?" He looked at the floor, visibly shrinking under my gaze, like he couldn't bear the weight of my words. I wanted him to say something, anything, that would make sense of this madness. But all I got was more silence, the kind that felt suffocating. "I never thought it would hurt you like this," he muttered finally, his voice breaking. "Of course, you didn't," I said bitterly. "You didn't think, period. You just did what you wanted and let everything else fall apart." There was no apology, no remorse that felt real. Just empty words, a hollow explanation that didn't make any of this easier to swallow. I realized, then, that this wasn't just an affair. This was my brother completely destroying the trust we had built for years. It wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of the family, of everything we stood for. I felt my hands balling into fists, my body trembling with emotion. I couldn't look at him anymore. I turned away, staring out the window, trying to calm my racing heart. There was nothing left to say. He had already said it all with his silence. And yet, the worst part wasn't over. I thought I was ready for the confrontation. I thought I'd prepared myself for the anger, the pain, the betrayal. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it all. After everything was said, and my brother stood there, like a deer caught in headlights. I was left with this empty, hollow feeling. The man I thought I knew, the one who had shared my childhood, my struggles, my victories, he was nothing but a shadow now, a stranger who had torn through my life without a second thought. I didn't know what to do. The rage in me burned so hot that I almost couldn't control it. But instead of unleashing it, I just stood there, frozen, watching him squirm. He'd destroyed our bond, and now I was standing at the edge of a precipice, wondering if there was anything left to salvage. Could I ever look at him the same way again? Could I ever see him as family? He didn't speak, didn't even try to explain anymore. He just stood there, defeated. His guilt was palpable, but it wasn't enough. It didn't undo what had been done. I walked past him, not saying another word. I needed space, needed time to think. But my mind was clouded, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. The truth had shattered everything. And while I wanted to scream at him, to let him know how much he had hurt me, something in me refused to break. If he wasn't going to apologize, if he wasn't going to show any remorse, then I wasn't going to waste any more of my time on him. I went to my wife next. The confrontation wasn't over. As much as I resented her, I couldn't leave things in limbo. I owed it to myself, at least, to hear her out, to hear what she had to say for herself. When I walked into the living room, she was sitting on the couch, her face blotchy from crying. She looked up at me, her eyes full of guilt and shame. I felt nothing. Not pity, not even anger, just a deep, profound emptiness. Why? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why him? She flinched, as if the question physically hurt her. I don't know, it was wrong. It was stupid, and I regret it every day. But it happened. Regret? That's all you've got to say? She tried to reach out to me, but I pulled away. Her touch didn't mean anything anymore. Not after what she had done. The woman I had loved and trusted had destroyed everything we had built together. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I couldn't look at her anymore. Not like this. I had nothing left to say. Everything was broken. Every word, every promise, every memory we had shared. It was all tainted now. I turned and walked out, leaving her behind. I didn't know where I was going or what I was supposed to do next. But one thing was certain, I had to leave this behind. Both of them. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't want to know. My mind was a mess of anger, hurt, and confusion, and I was so tired of thinking, so tired of pretending. So I drove. The road blurred under the headlights, and I let the miles pass in silence, hoping that the distance would somehow clear my mind. But the truth followed me, no matter how far I went. I had spent years building my life around these people, my wife, my brother, and now it felt like it was all just a house of cards. One gust of wind, one push, and everything came crashing down. I drove to the outskirts of town, to a place that held memories, before everything fell apart. I parked by the lake, watching the ripples in the water. It was supposed to be peaceful, a place I could collect my thoughts. But there was no peace. My phone buzzed. I didn't look at it. I already knew who it was. My wife had tried calling, then texting, probably begging for answers, for forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to hear it. I couldn't even face myself, let alone her. How could she have done this? How could he have? I had spent so many years fighting for our relationship, for my family, and now I was left with a question. What was it all for? The hours passed, but I didn't move. The pain in my chest was like a weight I couldn't shake off. The betrayal ran deep, deeper than I ever imagined. My brother, my own flesh and blood, had gone behind my back and crossed a line that was unforgivable. My wife, the woman I loved, had chosen him, not just in a moment of weakness, but over and over again. She had let this affair continue, knowing full well that it would tear us apart. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to go back. I couldn't go back. No matter how much I still loved her, no matter how much history we had, this was a line that couldn't be crossed. The foundation of everything I thought was real was shattered. I called a lawyer. I didn't know what the next steps were, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be manipulated by guilt or by the promises of reconciliation. I had given everything to this marriage, and now it was time to walk away. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but wonder, what if this was just the beginning of everything falling apart? I thought I had it all figured out. I had made my decision, leave, get the divorce, cut ties with both of them. It seemed simple enough, right? But when I walked back through that front door, I realized that I was far from done with this nightmare. The calm I thought I'd find, the space I so desperately needed, was nowhere in sight. In fact, things had only just begun to spiral out of control. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. She didn't look up at first, but I could feel her eyes on me. I knew what was coming. Another apology, more tears. She would beg me to understand, to forgive her, and I didn't know if I had it in me to hear it. But then, as I stood there, I noticed something. She wasn't just sitting there, waiting for me to speak. She was holding something. It was a letter. She pushed it toward me, not speaking, just waiting for me to take it. I was tired. I didn't want any more surprises. But something inside me told me to read it, to at least know what she was holding in her hands. I unfolded the paper, half expecting to see another one of her apologies. But instead, what I saw was the last thing I ever could have imagined, a confession from my brother. It wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't just an apology. No, it was much darker than that. He had confessed everything, not just his betrayal, but his manipulation. He admitted to intentionally pushing her away from me, to fueling the emotional distance between us. He had used my vulnerabilities against me, waiting for me to fall apart so he could step in. But what crushed me the most was what he had said at the end. I've always wanted what you have. And now, I finally got it. I could barely hold the letter in my hands. I wanted to crumple it up and throw it in her face, to scream at both of them. But I was frozen. This was bigger than I had ever anticipated. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was calculated. It was deliberate. And now I was standing at the edge of something even worse than betrayal. I was facing manipulation on a level I couldn't comprehend. I didn't know, she whispered. I never knew he felt that way. I didn't know what to say. How could she not have known? How could she not have seen through him when he was pulling the strings from behind the scenes? How could I have been so blind? And then, she dropped the bombshell that I never expected. Your brother's not the only one who's been manipulating you, she said quietly, barely above a whisper. There's more you need to know. Something bigger. I felt the blood drain from my face. What more could there be? What else could they have possibly hidden from me? The weight of my brother's confession still hung in the air, but when my wife spoke again, it felt like the ground beneath me gave way. My head was already spinning from everything I had learned, but her next words sent a chill down my spine. Your parents knew, she said, her voice barely audible, like she was afraid to speak the truth out loud. They knew about the affair before you did. The room suddenly felt smaller and the air thicker. My mind couldn't keep up with what she was saying. How could they know? My parents, my own flesh and blood, had always been the ones I trusted, the ones I could turn to when things got tough. The thought that they had been part of this betrayal was unthinkable. I stared at her, dumbfounded. What do you mean? How could they know? Her eyes flickered with shame, and she looked away. They were complicit. From the beginning. When it started, they encouraged him, told me to be patient, that you were too busy, that I needed someone to lean on. They even said it was only a matter of time before you'd pull away completely. That's when it all started. My breath caught in my chest, the room spinning around me. I could barely comprehend what she was saying. My parents, the people who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, they had known about my brother's affair and had not only done nothing but actively supported it. It was as if everything I thought was real had been turned upside down. How long? I asked, my voice hoarse. How long have they known? Months, she whispered. Before you even started suspecting anything. Before you noticed the distance between us. I staggered back, the shock of it hitting me like a freight train. Months. They had watched my marriage crumble, and instead of warning me, instead of supporting me, they had allowed it to happen, even encouraged it. It wasn't just my wife who betrayed me. It was my own family, too. I couldn't breathe. My world had become unrecognizable. As I stood there, reeling from everything, a quiet rage began to build inside me. I wasn't going to let this go. No one was going to get away with destroying my life. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I needed space, but more than that, I needed to think. The lies, the manipulation, it had all gone too far. The weight of the truth kept pressing down on me, heavier than I could handle. My brother, my wife, and now my parents. Everyone had been a part of this betrayal. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They'd all played their part in deceiving me, in breaking the trust one had in them. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed them to own up to what they had done. This couldn't go unanswered. I couldn't waste any more time. I called my parents early the next day. No waiting. No pretending this wasn't a big deal. I needed to hear from them, right then, if they had known what was happening. I had no idea how they would react, but I wasn't prepared to let them dodge this anymore. They had to face the consequences. When they arrived, it was clear they already knew this conversation was coming. My mother looked pale, her hands shaking, while my father stood there, more reserved than usual. His silence was unsettling. He wasn't the kind of man to hide behind words, but today he wasn't saying much. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady but cutting. "About the affair. About you two knowing about it and doing nothing." The room went quiet. My mother looked as though she'd been caught in a lie, but my father just exhaled, as though this moment had been inevitable. I could see it in his eyes, guilt, but no real surprise. He had known this was coming. My mother was the first to speak, but it wasn't what I wanted to hear. "We thought we were protecting you," she whispered. "We didn't want you to have to face this. We didn't want you to get hurt." Protecting me? Her words hit me like a slap. I had spent my life trusting these people, leaning on them when things got tough, and now they were telling me they thought lying to me was protecting me. They had watched my life fall apart and had said nothing. "I didn't want protection," I shot back. "I wanted the truth. I wanted you to tell me what was really going on." My father, who had been eerily quiet until now, finally spoke. "We didn't want to make it worse for you," he said. "You were so focused on your career, we thought this was the only way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The only way?" I yelled. "By letting him betray me? By allowing this to happen in front of my face?" There was nothing left to say. Their excuses didn't change what had been done. I couldn't undo the damage. "I'm done," I muttered, turning away from them. The walls felt like they were closing in. My parents, the people I had trusted the most, were now the source of the deepest betrayal. I had no words left. After confronting my parents, I thought the worst of it was over. But as I stood there, facing the fallout, I realized the damage had only begun. The truth had fractured everything, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. I walked out of the house, needing to be away from it all, the deceit, the lies, and the weight of what had just been revealed. I needed clarity, but I didn't know where to find it. My mind raced through every conversation, every look, every moment of doubt I'd had over the past months. All of it had been leading up to this, but I couldn't wrap my head around how my family had been so willing to let me suffer. I drove, aimlessly at first, just trying to escape the suffocating pressure. But I couldn't outrun the thoughts. My mind kept circling back to the same place. What now? What did this all mean? Could I ever look at my wife or my brother the same way again? And my parents? How could I ever trust them? How could I rebuild any part of my life when the very people I had counted on had betrayed me so completely? Eventually, I found myself in a quiet park, sitting in my car. The stillness around me seemed to mirror the emptiness I felt inside. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it. My wife again. I had ignored every text, every call. I couldn't bear to hear her voice right now. She had shattered everything. The idea of reconciliation seemed impossible, even though part of me still wished for things to be different. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo the truth. I couldn't forget what she had done or what my brother had done to me. The betrayal was too deep. I needed time. Time away from all of them. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but I had to find a way to heal, on my own, without the people who had once meant everything to me. When I finally answered my phone, it wasn't my wife. It was my brother. "Hey," he said, his voice shaky. "We need to talk." I wasn't sure if I could take hearing him out loud. The man I had once trusted, the one I had considered my best friend, had become the last person I wanted to hear from. But I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what he wanted. "I don't know what else there is to say," I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You've already said enough." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I never meant to hurt you." I couldn't even bring myself to respond. The words felt hollow, empty. Sorry didn't cut it. Not after everything. "I can't do this," I muttered, hanging up before he could say more. I turned off my phone and sat in the park, in silence, letting the weight of everything sink in. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. This was the end of my family as I knew it. And I didn't know if I could ever put it back together. For days, I couldn't bring myself to face anyone. I stayed away from the house, not wanting to confront the wreckage of my marriage, my family. Every place I went felt tainted, as if the betrayal was etched into the very walls of my life. My thoughts were still tangled up, but there was a strange, hollow clarity growing inside me. The kind of clarity that comes only when everything around you falls apart. I couldn't let the anger and confusion rule me forever. I needed to make a decision, one that wasn't driven by hurt or rage, but by a sense of self-preservation. The truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore, not in this new reality. The people I had trusted most had turned out to be the ones who had hurt me the deepest. So, I had to rebuild, without them. The calls from my wife and my brother kept coming, but I ignored them. I had no more words for them, no more questions. What was there to say? I couldn't take back what had happened, and I couldn't forgive them. Not yet. I started the painful process of detaching. It wasn't easy. For years, I had been so deeply intertwined with my wife, with my brother, with my parents. But now, they felt like strangers. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking away from the version of myself that had existed with them. The man who believed in his family, who trusted them blindly. That version of me no longer had a place in this world. One evening, as I sat in a quiet coffee shop, I thought about the future. What did I want for myself now? What did I need to feel whole again? The answers didn't come quickly, but I started to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Hope for a life where I didn't have to carry the weight of others' choices. Hope that, one day, I could trust again. It would take time. I knew that. There was no rushing this kind of healing. But there was something inside me, deep down, that told me I would be okay, that I would rise from this, stronger and more aware of my worth. As I walked back to my car that night, I glanced at the phone in my hand. Another message from my wife. She was sorry. She wanted to make it right. I couldn't even bring myself to read it. I deleted it. And for the first time in days, I felt a strange, quiet peace. Deleting her message felt like the right choice at the time, but I couldn't escape the emptiness it left behind. The hurt was still there, lingering in the back of my mind, gnawing at me. I thought walking away from it all would bring peace, but instead, it left a gaping hole in my life. My marriage was over, my family fractured beyond repair. The hardest part, though, was realizing that while the pieces were scattered, I had to rebuild them, without them. I spent days in limbo. The world felt both too loud and too quiet at once. It was hard to focus on anything, work, friends, even simple distractions like going to the gym. Everywhere I turned, I saw reminders of what I had lost, what had been stolen from me. But I had to keep moving forward. I had no choice. The calls from my wife and brother didn't stop, but each time I saw their names on my phone, I felt the weight of all the betrayal. At first, I ignored them completely, but after a few days, I realized I couldn't avoid the inevitable conversation forever. I owed it to myself to hear them out, to know if there was anything left of the people I had loved, or if the damage was truly irreparable. I picked up the phone when my brother called. His voice was thick with guilt, shaky, and I could tell he was struggling to find the words. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said softly, "but I need you to know I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." I listened, the silence between us almost deafening. Part of me wanted to hang up and never look back. But I stayed. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be okay. You've done something that can't be undone. You crossed a line that can't be erased. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. I don't know how to fix it. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." But the truth was, nothing he could say would ever change what had happened. The betrayal ran too deep. I couldn't rebuild the trust. I couldn't pretend it hadn't shattered everything I knew. "I need space," I replied, cutting him off. "You've done enough." The phone went silent, and I ended the call. Hanging up felt like the final act in a chapter one never wanted to read. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew it would take time, lots of it, to move past this. But I was starting to realize something important. I didn't need to rebuild my life around the people who had hurt me. It was time to create a life of my own. I had spent weeks trying to ignore the pain, pretending that moving on would come easily. But the truth was, it wasn't going to happen overnight. Healing never does. There were moments when I thought I was getting better, when I thought I could let go of the past. And then there were moments when the weight of it all crashed down on me again. I wasn't just walking away from a marriage. I was walking away from a version of myself that had trusted those closest to me. I took long walks through the city, trying to clear my head. The world around me was moving. People were living their lives, and here I was, stuck in a loop of betrayal and loss. I had become so accustomed to a life built on falsehoods that even the truth now felt foreign. But things started to change, slowly. I spent more time with friends who hadn't turned their backs on me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was able to laugh without that tightness in my chest. I was able to look forward to things without constantly wondering if I would fall apart again. It was a slow process, but I was making progress. One night, a close friend invited me out to a small gathering. I almost declined. Part of me still wanted to stay home, to wallow in the comfort of my own misery. But something pushed me to go. I needed to feel alive again, to remind myself that I wasn't defined by what had happened. The evening was relaxed, filled with casual conversation and laughter. And then, unexpectedly, I found myself talking to someone who caught my attention in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. She was kind, understanding, but most importantly, genuine. She didn't know my past, and I didn't need to explain it. There was something refreshing about the way she listened, the way she spoke, and in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as broken as I thought. By the end of the night, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the spark of something new. The possibility that life could still offer me joy, even after everything that had been taken away. I wasn't sure what the future held, or if I was ready to dive into something new. But for the first time in months, I felt the quiet stirrings of hope. I wasn't going to rush anything, but I had a new understanding. I was worthy of more than the pain I had carried for so long.